Now, here's a question for you. Do younger people these days have it tougher than younger people of, say, 30 or 40 years ago? Well, according to one new survey, they do. It says lack of job security and the difficulties of buying a house are making life harder than the generation which grew up in the shadow of the Cold War. The survey revealed that 68% of people think today's 20-somethings endure more hardship than those of 40 years ago. The main reasons are money worries, lack of job security, housing costs and concerns about their body image, factors which worried the older generation far less. Priorities also change. The average 20-something now is twice as likely to want to make money quickly as generations before. So perhaps not surprisingly, stress is a bigger problem too. 41% of young people say they experience regular or constant stress, with just 15% saying the same thing 40 years ago. Well, here to discuss this now is the 50-something broadcaster, Nick Ferrari. We're being kind. And the journalist, Ed Hoker, who is the co-author of The Jilted Generation. Ed, you just hit your 30s, haven't you? So
I have, yes.
Welcome to the club. But you remember your 20s, don't you?
Well, I'm obviously delighted to be out of my 20s.
OK, well, let's start with you. How are you feeling tonight? Are you a bit stressed? Because according to that survey, young people these days are far more stressed than they were 20 years ago.
Well, I think that's probably right. I mean, young people work harder now, frankly, than they used to. In fact, all of the British population who work harder than they used to. They work longer hours, they take fewer holidays. And they often do so in an environment where their pay is kind of stagnant. And the particular problem that young people have in the UK is that house prices have spiralled far beyond where they expected them to be, and that has an impact on rents too. So it used to be in the 1970s that roughly the average first-time buyer house would be, I don't know, twice the total annual income. Now it's 4 times. It's a big difference. And then there's a massive question about jobs too. OK, so that's 3 things to talk about with you, Nick. Working far harder, much more expensive to buy a house. And the third thing was... Oh, jobs.
And not
huge
many jobs.
Unemployment.
What do you think of that?
I mean, there's a fair point. But I come from a generation, right? If you're in the classroom, you were always looking out for a blackboard rubber to hit you square between the eyes. That would now be child abuse. You go in and take exams. You didn't get a B grade just because you could spell your name right, which is the way it is now. If you got into the workplace, you could be subjected to the most appalling bullying and harassment, and it was commonplace. You could get fired like that. They didn't have to write you up any of this nonsense. You'd then go to the pub to commiserate. You'd probably get secondary cancer because it was full of smoking. You'd try and take your girlfriend out for a meal and somebody next to them would be smoking. We used to have to wear like long hair, like a mullet and flares. We weren't being ironic. That's actually, we thought we looked good. And the height of culinary design was a Vesta even, Chinese chow mein that you heated up. It was terrible, terrible, dark days. Kids today have got everything. They've got jobs. I know it's hard to get a job. Well, once they have, they've got fantastic job security. They've got all sorts of options we didn't have.
And you've also got amazing amounts of technology at your fingertips, and you can travel the world far more than teenagers and 20-year-olds did when they were in their 20s.
Well, that's dead right. But here's the strange thing. We end up in a position where young people in Britain have huge amounts of technology. They have great lifestyles, but the fundamentals of life, like how you can build a career and get a job, aren't there. A third of adults under 30 live with their parents now because they can't afford to move out. Those really big things are getting harder to deal with.
Let's take you back in time, Nick. So we've got a fantastic picture of you when you were in your 20s. Very handsome chap, I have to say. Those sunglasses have come back into fashion, haven't they, now?
Really look strangely like Carlos the Jackal, actually. I was lucky I didn't get arrested.
Go on, tell us, what was good about your 20s? There must have been something that's better than the 20-year-old is having at the moment.
Jobs. Ed's absolutely right, jobs.
And what about stress? Why were you less stressed, do you think?
Why were we less stressed? I think life was so much more straightforward. If you weren't very good, right, and particularly the industry that I was in, and I worked in newspapers, and I worked at a newspaper like The Sun in my 20s, if you weren't very good, you were told you weren't very good, and you weren't sent off for constructive training or something like that, you were just kicked out the door. So things were so much more black and white. Now, if you are of a fairly robust personality, you can take it, but it's not for everybody.
People do moan a lot. You don't, but people do these days when they're younger, don't they?
They're terrified about body image, as the survey pointed out. And
look how I looked, for God's sake. I managed to get
I'm not going down that road now. But the truth is that actually people are really insecure now, and you see that in Facebook all the time. That all their Facebook messages are about trying to kind of, make it look like they're fashionable.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll leave it there. Maybe you two can have a chat afterwards and you can put each other right. There you go. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.